The dust cloud on the horizon appeared just after dawn, a single figure moving through the heat shimmer like a phantom refusing to fade. And by the time she reached the main street of Redemption Springs, Texas, every soul in town had gathered to witness the woman who walked in carrying nothing but the threadbare dress on her back and something indefinable burning in her eyes. It was July 1878, and the sun had already turned merciless by 8 in the morning. The town itself was barely 5 years old, a collection of weathered buildings clustered around a spring that had saved more than one dying man crossing the brutal stretch between San Antonio and El Paso. The saloon stood on one corner, the general store on another, and between them sprawled a dozen other establishments that served the ranchers, drifters, and dreamers who called this unforgiving land home. She stopped in the middle of the street, swaying slightly. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had once held it, falling past her shoulders in waves that might have been beautiful if they were not so tangled with dust. Her dress, once perhaps a respectable blue calico, had faded to something between gray and nothing at all. No hat shaded her face. No shoes protected her feet, which were wrapped in strips of cloth that had once been part of a petticoat. She carried no bag, no canteen, no weapon, but she did not fall. Thomas Everett Kane had been checking the shoes on his bay mare outside the blacksmith shop when he first spotted her. At 26, he had seen his share of desperate people in desperate situations, but something about the way this woman held herself made him straighten up and take notice. She was not begging. She was not crying. She was simply standing there as if she had every right to exist in that space, despite clearly having nothing that would justify such confidence. He handed the mare's reins to the blacksmith and started across the street, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. Other folks were emerging from doorways now, curious and cautious in equal measure. Mrs. Henley from the boarding house, old Pete from the saloon, the Garrett brothers who ran the general store, even Sheriff Morrison, though he stayed on his porch, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching. Everett reached her first. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. Her face was sunburned and streaked with salt trails where sweat had dried, but her eyes were clear. Green as new grass after a rare rain, those eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him forget whatever he had been about to say. "Water," she said finally. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Not a plea, a statement of need." "Yes, ma'am," Everett replied, recovering himself. He turned to gesture toward the general store, but she swayed again, more pronounced this time, and he instinctively reached out to steady her. His hand closed around her upper arm, and he was shocked at how thin she was beneath the fabric, how much of her strength was clearly just while holding up an exhausted body. "The store is just there," he said, gentling his voice the way he would with a spooked horse. "They will have water. Food, too, if you need it." "I have no money," she said, and the way she said it suggested this was simply another fact, not a source of shame. "That is all right," Everett found himself saying. "I will vouch for you." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Mockery, perhaps, or the kind of charity that came with strings attached. Whatever she sought, she must have been satisfied because she gave a single small nod. "Thank you," she said. "I am not looking for charity, though. I am looking for work, any kind of honest work. I can earn my keep." Everett became aware that they had an audience. Half the town was watching this exchange with undisguised interest. In a place like Redemption Springs, where the same faces saw each other every day and gossip was more valuable than gold, a mysterious woman appearing from nowhere was an event worth canceling morning plans for. "Let us get you out of this sun first," he said. "Then we can talk about work." He guided her toward the general store, acutely conscious of her weight against his arm, light as a child despite her height. She walked with her spine straight, though, refusing to lean on him more than necessary. Pride, he thought. She had pride even when she had nothing else. The interior of the store was blessedly cool, shaded by the overhang and thick adobe walls. James Garrett looked up from behind the counter, his expression curious but not unkind. His brother William emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. "This lady needs water," Everett said. "And food, if you have something ready." James was already reaching for the dipper in the water barrel they kept for customers. He filled it and handed it across the counter. The woman took it with both hands, forcing herself to drink slowly despite what must have been a desperate thirst. Everett watched her throat work as she swallowed, watched her close her eyes briefly in relief. When she lowered the dipper, she was more composed. "Thank you," she said to James. "I will repay you when I am able. Where did you come from, miss?" William asked, not impolitely but with the natural caution of someone who had survived 5 years in a frontier town by asking questions. "San Antonio," she replied. "I have been walking for 8 days." A murmur ran through the small crowd that had followed them into the store. 8 days. That was near about 90 miles, depending on the route. Through country where the Comanche still raided, where rattlesnakes outnumbered people, where water was scarce and the sun could kill a person as sure as any bullet. "Alone?" James asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "Alone," she confirmed. She set the dipper down on the counter with a decisive click. "My name is Clara Brennan. I came here because I heard this was a growing town, a place where a person could start over if they were willing to work hard. I am willing to work harder than anyone you have ever met. I can clean, cook, sew, keep accounts, read and write well, and I learn quickly. I am asking for a chance, just a chance." The silence that followed was heavy with judgment and consideration in equal measure. Everett found himself leaning forward, invested in her success in a way that surprised him. He did not know this woman, had not even known she existed 10 minutes ago, but something about her directness, her refusal to make herself smaller or more pitiable, made him want to help her. "That is quite a speech," Sheriff Morrison said from the doorway. He had followed them in, along with what seemed like half the town. "But you understand folks here are going to want to know more. Why did you leave San Antonio? Why walk all this way alone? A woman does not do that without a powerful reason." Clara turned to face the sheriff. She did not flinch from his scrutiny. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said. "Fever. We had no money for a doctor, and by the time the church found one willing to come for free, it was too late. We had been living in one room above a stable. After he died, the landlord wanted the room for someone who could pay. I had no family, no friends with means to help. I tried to find work, but there were too many women in the same situation and not enough positions. I heard a man at the market talking about West Texas, about towns springing up, about opportunities. So I saved every penny I could, bought what I thought I would need for the journey, and hired a seat on a wagon heading west." "What happened to the wagon?" Everett asked. "The driver tried to demand a different kind of payment than what we had agreed upon," Clara said flatly. "When I refused, he took my bag and left me on the side of the trail. That was 8 days ago." The temperature in the room seemed to drop despite the heat outside. Everett felt his jaw tighten. That kind of thing happened more often than decent people wanted to acknowledge, but hearing it stated so plainly made his blood heat with anger. "You know this driver's name?" Morrison asked, his voice gone hard. He called himself Jack Sterling. "I do not know if that was true. He had a scar here," she touched her left cheek, "and he was missing 2 fingers on his right hand." "I know him," Morrison said grimly. "He is a bastard, pardon my language, ma'am, but he usually runs freight between here and San Antonio. I will make some inquiries." Clara shook her head. "The bag is long gone by now. It does not matter. What matters is whether anyone here is willing to give me work." Everett saw the calculation happening on faces around him, saw the Garrett brothers exchange a glance. Saw Mrs. Henley from the boarding house purse her lips thoughtfully. Redemption Springs was not a rich town. Nobody had extra money to throw around on charity cases. But he could also see something else, a grudging respect for this woman's spine, for the fact that she had survived 8 days in the wilderness and walked into town asking for work instead of begging for handouts. "I could use help at the boarding house," Mrs. Henley said finally. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, widowed herself, who ran the only boarding house in town with an iron will and a surprisingly kind heart. The work is hard. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, changing linens. I can offer room and board plus a small wage, nothing fancy but honest. Clara's face transformed. The exhaustion was still there, the sunburn and the dust, but underneath it, hope blazed like a struck match. "I will take it," she said. "Thank you, Mrs. Henley, I will not disappoint you." "Call me Alice," Mrs. Henley said. "And you look like you are about to fall over. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. I found a creek with cattails growing." Alice clicked her tongue and turned to the Garrett brothers. "Give her some bread and cheese. Put it on my account. Come along, Clara. Let us get you properly fed and cleaned up. You can start work tomorrow after you have had a chance to rest." Clara followed Alice toward the door, then paused and turned back. Her eyes found Everett's across the crowd. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to speak up for me." "Most men would not have." "Most men are fools," Everett said, and was rewarded with the ghost of a smile on her lips. Then she was gone, following Alice into the bright morning, and Everett was left standing in the general store feeling like something important had just happened, though he could not have said exactly what. "You have that look," James Garrett said, a knowing grin on his face. "What look?" "The look of a man who just got hit by lightning and is still figuring out whether he is alive or dead." "I do not know what you are talking about," Everett said, but he could feel heat creeping up his neck that had nothing to do with the weather. William laughed. "Sure you do not." "Same look my brother had when he first saw Catherine Murphy at the church social last year. She was in trouble, I helped, that is all." "Whatever you say, Everett," James was still grinning, "but I will tell you this. That woman has something special about her. Mark my words, she is going to shake things up around here." Everett paid for the supplies he had come for and headed back out into the heat, but James's words stayed with him. Clara Brennan had something special, that much was true. She had walked 90 miles alone through country that killed experienced men. She had arrived with literally nothing and immediately asked for work, instead of pity. She had looked at a town full of strangers and seen possibility instead of despair. "That's enough to build on, miss," he thought. More than enough. Over the next 2 weeks, Everett found himself inventing reasons to visit the boarding house. He needed to ask Alice about the church social coming up. He had to drop off a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. He wanted to see if she needed any repairs done to her fence. The excuses were transparent, and Alice's knowing smile every time he showed up made that clear, but she never called him on it, and every time he visited, he saw Clara. She was always working. Scrubbing floors or hanging laundry or carrying water or kneading bread. But she was also transforming. The gaunt look was fading as regular meals filled her out. The sunburn had healed to a light tan. Her hair, properly washed and pinned, was a rich chestnut color that caught the light. She moved with efficiency and grace, and Everett noticed he was not the only man in town who had started to pay attention. That bothered him more than it should have. On a Wednesday afternoon, he finally worked up the courage to do more than just make small talk. Clara was in the back garden of the boarding house, taking down dry sheets from the line. The white fabric snapped and billowed in the wind like sails. "Afternoon," he called out as he approached. She turned, and when she saw him, her face softened into a smile that made his heart do something complicated in his chest. "Mr. Kane, another urgent matter to discuss with Alice," so she had noticed. He felt absurdly pleased by that. "Actually, I came to see you." Her hands stilled on the sheet she was folding. "Oh, there is a dance this Saturday. Nothing fancy, just folks gathering at the church hall, music and food and a chance to socialize. I was wondering if you might like to go, with me, I mean." He had faced down charging steers with less nervousness than he felt waiting for her answer. Clara looked down at the sheet in her hands, smoothing it carefully. "I do not have a dress suitable for dancing," she said quietly. "Nobody will care about that," Everett said quickly. Folks here do not stand on ceremony. You could wear what you have on now and fit right in. It is not about fitting in. She met his eyes again. I want to say yes, but I do not want you to ask me out of pity. You helped me when I arrived. You vouched for me. I am grateful for that. But I do not want your charity, Mr. Kane. Everett, he corrected. And this is not charity. I am asking because I want to spend time with you, because I think you are remarkable, because you walked 90 miles alone and then asked for work before you even got water. Because you smile at me like I just said something clever even when all I did was say good morning. That is why I am asking. The wind caught the sheet between them, billowing it up, and for a moment they were hidden from the house. In that brief privacy, Clara's expression opened up into something vulnerable and real. I would like to go to the dance with you, Everett, she said. Yes, he grinned, suddenly feeling like he could rope the sun. Good, that is good. I will pick you up at 7. I will be ready. Saturday took approximately 100 years to arrive. Everett spent the intervening days working his small ranch with less than his usual focus, much to the amusement of his ranch hand, a weathered man named Dutch who had been with him since he first bought the land 3 years ago. You are going to cut your own leg off if you do not pay attention to what you are doing, Dutch observed as Everett nearly walked into a fence post. I am paying attention. Sure, that is why you just tried to feed the horses chicken feed and the chickens hay. Everett looked down at the bucket in his hand and swore. Dutch's laughter followed him across the yard. The truth was, he could not stop thinking about Clara. Not just the dance, though he was looking forward to that with an intensity that surprised him, but everything about her. The way she had described her husband's death with such quiet grief. The way she had refused to be a victim even when she had every right to be. The way she threw herself into her work at the boarding house as if proving her worth with every task completed. He found himself wondering what her life had been like before tragedy struck. Had she been happy? Had her husband been good to her? Did she want to love again, or was she still too raw from loss? These were questions he had no right to ask after knowing her less than 2 weeks, but they circled in his mind like buzzards anyway. When Saturday finally arrived, Everett spent an unreasonable amount of time getting ready. He bathed, trimmed his beard, put on his best shirt, the dark blue one his sister had sent from St. Louis last Christmas. Dutch watched these preparations with undisguised glee. Never seen you fuss so much, he said. Must be some woman. She is, Everett said simply. He rode into town as the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The church hall was already lit up, spilling warm light and the sounds of fiddle music into the dusty street. Horses and wagons clustered around it like moths to a flame. Alice answered his knock at the boarding house door. She will be right down, she said, and there was approval in her eyes that made Everett stand a little straighter. Then Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, and every coherent thought left his head. She was wearing a dress he had never seen before, a soft green color that brought out her eyes. It was simple, nothing fancy, but it fit her properly and made her look like something out of a painting. Her hair was pinned up with small white flowers woven through it. She looked nervous and beautiful and completely unlike the exhausted woman who had walked into town 2 weeks ago. Alice and some of the other ladies helped, she said, smoothing her hands over the skirt self-consciously. They had fabric they were not using, and Mrs. Porter is a wonder with a needle. Is it all right? You look beautiful, Everett said honestly. I mean, you always look beautiful, but tonight especially. I am going to be the envy of every man at that dance. She ducked her head, but he could see the pleased smile on her lips. You clean up pretty well yourself, Everett Kane. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked to the church hall together through the warm evening, not talking much, just comfortable in each other's presence. Everett was hyper-aware of her hand on his arm, the soft fabric of her dress occasionally brushing against his leg, the scent of lavender soap that clung to her skin. The church hall was packed. It seemed like everyone in Redemption Springs and half the surrounding ranches had turned out for the dance. The fiddler was sawing away at a lively tune while couples spun across the floor. Tables along one wall groaned under the weight of food contributions. Children darted between adults, wild with the excitement of staying up late. Everett saw heads turn as they entered, saw the whispers start, but he also saw the friendly waves, the welcoming nods. Clara had made an impression in her 2 weeks here. People respected hard work, and she had demonstrated that in spades. "Everett, you old dog," called out Thomas Hart, a rancher from up north. "Finally worked up the courage, did you?" "Mind your own business, Hart," Everett shot back, but he was grinning. They found space along the wall, and Everett went to fetch them punch while Clara was immediately surrounded by Alice and several other women who wanted to admire her dress. By the time he returned with 2 cups, she was laughing at something Mrs. Porter had said, her whole face lit up with genuine joy, his heart squeezed painfully in his chest. This was what he wanted, to see her happy, to be the one who helped make her happy. "Dance with me," he asked, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation. Everett was not the best dancer, but he knew the basic steps well enough not to embarrass himself. What mattered more was the feeling of Clara's hand in his, her other hand resting lightly on his shoulder, the way she followed his lead with natural grace. They turned and stepped in time with the music, surrounded by other couples, but somehow alone in their own bubble. "Thank you for this," Clara said softly as they moved. "I have not felt this normal in a very long time." "What is normal?" Everett asked. "This, dancing, laughing, being around people who are not looking at me with pity or suspicion. For 6 months after Henry died, I was the widow everyone felt sorry for, but nobody wanted to actually help. I became invisible. But here I feel like a person again. You are a person, a remarkable one. You keep saying that, because it is true." The song ended and another began, faster this time. Everett spun Clara out and back, delighted by her breathless laugh. They danced until they were both flushed and breathing hard, then retreated to the refreshment table for water. "You are full of surprises, Mr. Kane," Clara said, pressing her cup against her cheek to cool herself. "I did not take you for a dancer. My mother insisted all her children learn, said it was an essential social skill. Where is your family now?" St. Louis mostly. "Mother and my sister Catherine. I came out here 5 years ago looking for land of my own, wanted to build something, you know. My father died when I was young, and I just felt like I needed to prove I could make it on my own terms." "I understand that feeling," Clara said quietly. They talked more as the evening progressed. Between dances, they found a bench outside where the air was cooler and the stars were beginning to emerge in impossible numbers. Everett told her about his ranch, about his dreams to build it into something sustainable. Clara told him about growing up in Tennessee, about moving to Texas with Henry full of hope, about the slow erosion of that hope as poverty ground them down. "I loved him," she said, looking up at the stars. "But if I am honest, we married too young. We did not really know each other. He was kind but weak. He could not hold a job, could not stand up for himself. I spent more time taking care of him than being his partner. When he died, I grieved. But I also felt this terrible relief and then guilt about feeling relieved. Does that make me an awful person?" "It makes you human," Everett said. "Love is complicated. I think you can miss someone and still recognize that your life might be better without them. Those things are not mutually exclusive." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt stripped bare under that gaze. "You are not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I do not know, just not someone who would say things like that, not someone who would see me as more than a sad story or a burden. Clara, you are the furthest thing from a burden I have ever met. You are a force of nature." She laughed at that, soft and genuine. "I walked into town nearly dead from thirst, some force of nature. You walked into town," Everett corrected. "That is the important part. You did not give up, you did not quit. You walked in with nothing but hope, and I told you then, that is enough to build on. I meant it." The words hung between them in the cooling air. Clara's hand found his on the bench, her fingers tangling with his own. They sat like that for a long moment, listening to the music spilling from the hall, watching the stars wheel overhead, neither of them wanting to break the spell. "I should get you back," Everett said finally, reluctantly. "Alice will have my hide if I keep you out too late." "Alice likes you," Clara said. "She told me I should say yes when you asked, said you were one of the good ones." Alice is a wise woman. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, taking the long way, neither wanting the evening to end. At the door, Everett released her hand reluctantly. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Not just passing at the store or church, actually see you. Maybe go for a ride next Sunday if Alice can spare you." "I would like that," Clara said. "I would like that very much." She stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek, quick and soft. Then she was inside, the door closing behind her, leaving Everett standing in the dark street with his hand pressed against the spot where her lips had been, and a smile he could not have wiped off his face if he tried. The next weeks unfolded like a dream. Everett saw Clara every chance he got. They went for rides out to the spring the town was named for, a clear pool fed by an underground source that somehow stayed cool even in the brutal summer heat. They sat on his porch in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She came to his ranch and charmed Dutch into complete devotion by praising his coffee and listening to his stories about the war. Everett spent Sundays at the boarding house, helping with heavy work while finding excuses to be near Clara. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval. This was a place that valued love stories, especially ones that started with hardship and seemed headed toward happiness. But Everett knew he was in over his head. This was not just attraction or affection. This was something much bigger, much more terrifying. He was falling in love with Clara Brennan, and every day he fell a little harder. He loved the way she laughed, throwing her whole body into it. He loved her work ethic, the way she took pride in even the smallest task. He loved how she remembered details about people, asking after Dutch's sore knee or commenting on Alice's new recipe. He loved her strength, the way she had survived things that would have broken most people and come through still capable of kindness. He loved everything about her, and it scared him half to death. Because what if she did not feel the same way? What if she was just grateful for his help and was too polite to say so? What if she was not ready to open her heart again after losing Henry? These fears circled his mind late at night when he could not sleep, staring at his ceiling and thinking about green eyes and chestnut hair, and a smile that made the whole world brighter. August brought slightly cooler temperatures and the annual Founders' Day celebration. The town went all out with games, contests, and a big barbecue. Everett volunteered to help set up, which was really just an excuse to be wherever Clara was going to be. He found her helping Alice arrange tables in the town square. She had her hair tied back with a blue ribbon and was wearing a simple cotton dress. And she looked so perfectly right in this setting, laughing with the other women, belonging here in a way that made his chest tight with emotion. "You look like you are thinking awfully hard about something," Dutch said, appearing at his elbow with a crate of dishes. "Just thinking. About a certain young lady, maybe. You are going to ask her, are you not?" Everett glanced at his friend. "Ask her what? Do not play dumb." "You are going to ask her to marry you. I can see it written all over your face. Is it that obvious? Only to everyone with eyes." Dutch clapped him on the shoulder. "For what it is worth, I think it is a fine idea. She is good for you. Makes you happy in a way I have not seen since you came out here. What if she says no? Then she says no and you deal with it, but I do not think she will. That girl looks at you the same way you look at her." Yeah. The celebration was in full swing by noon. Children ran screaming through the games. Men competed in roping and shooting contests. Women sold baked goods and preserves to raise money for the new schoolhouse. The smell of roasting meat filled the air, making everyone's mouth water. Everett found Clara at the pie table, helping to slice and serve. She saw him coming and her face lit up in a way that made Dutch's words seem prophetic. "Try this," she said, holding out a fork with a bite of apple pie. "Mrs. Porter made it and it is unbelievable." He obediently opened his mouth, let her feed him the bite. The pie was good, but all he could really focus on was the domestic intimacy of the gesture, the way she watched his face for his reaction. "Amazing," he said, and meant it on multiple levels. They spent the afternoon together, drifting from event to event. Everett won her a ribbon at the shooting contest, much to the disgust of Hart, who had been trying to impress one of the new schoolteachers. Clara laughed so hard at Hart's expression that she had to sit down, and Everett thought he could live in that sound forever. As evening approached and lanterns were lit, the fiddler started up again. Couples drifted to the makeshift dance floor. Everett offered Clara his hand without a word, and she took it without hesitation. They had danced together several times since that first night, and by now they knew each other's rhythms. They moved together easily, naturally, like they had been doing this for years instead of weeks. The music was slow, giving Everett an excuse to hold her closer than propriety usually allowed. "Clara," he said softly, his mouth near her ear, "I need to tell you something." She pulled back enough to look at his face, concern flickering across her features. "What is it?" "I love you." The words hung between them, simple and enormous. Clara's eyes went wide, her lips parting in surprise. "I know it is fast," Everett continued, the words tumbling out now that he had started. "I know we have only known each other a couple of months. I know you might not be ready for this. But I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn refusal to give up. I love the way you look at the world like it is full of possibilities even after everything you have been through. I love you, and I needed you to know." They had stopped dancing. People were flowing around them, but Everett could not focus on anyone but Clara. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, then she smiled, slow and radiant and more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started loving you the moment you offered me water, or maybe when you vouched for me to the Garretts, or maybe when you asked me to the dance not out of pity, but because you actually wanted to spend time with me. I do not know exactly when it happened. I just know that it did, and I do not want to fight it anymore." Everett felt like he could fly, like he could pick up the earth and spin it, like every good thing that had ever happened to him was just preparation for this moment. "Marry me," he said. Clara laughed, joy and tears mingling in her eyes. "You are supposed to court a girl for longer than 2 months before asking that." "I do not care about supposed to. I care about you, about us, about building a life together. You walked into this town with nothing but hope. Let me be part of what you build. Let me help you. Let me love you for the rest of my life." "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes." Everett swept her up, spinning her around while she laughed and clung to his shoulders. Around them, people started to notice, started to cheer. Dutch was whooping like a madman. Alice was crying happy tears. The whole town seemed to fold them into its collective embrace, celebrating this love story that had started with dust and desperation and bloomed into something beautiful. They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where they had first danced. Clara wore a dress that had been her mother's, sent for from Tennessee in a flurry of joyful telegrams. Everett wore his best suit and could not stop grinning. Dutch stood up as his best man. Alice stood with Clara, beaming like a proud mother. The ceremony was simple and perfect. When the preacher told Everett he could kiss his bride, he did so thoroughly, earning hoots and hollers from the assembled crowd. Clara was laughing against his mouth, her hands fisted in his jacket, and he thought there had never been a happier moment in the history of the world. The reception was held at the church hall, the same place they had first danced. Everyone in town came, bringing food and drink and good wishes. They danced until Clara's feet hurt and Everett's face ached from smiling. They cut a cake that Alice had made, 4 layers of vanilla with buttercream frosting. They listened to toasts from friends and neighbors, some funny, some heartfelt, all genuine. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave for Everett's ranch, Clara threw her bouquet. It was caught by the new schoolteacher, a quiet woman named Margaret who blushed furiously while everyone cheered. Then they were in the wagon, driving through the moonlit night toward home. They're home. Clara leaned against Everett's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them quiet with contentment. "Are you happy?" Everett asked softly. "Happier than I knew I could be," Clara replied. 3 months ago I was alone and desperate. Tonight I am married to the best man I have ever known, in a town full of friends with a future that looks bright. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I never want to wake up. The ranch came into view, the house dark but welcoming. Dutch had discreetly made himself scarce, staying in town for the night to give them privacy. Everett helped Clara down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, carrying my bride over the threshold. "It is tradition." "I did not know you cared about tradition. Only the good ones." He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The house was simple, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was clean and sturdy and built with his own hands. He had spent the last week making it as welcoming as possible, adding curtains Clara had sewn, arranging furniture, picking wildflowers for the table. Clara looked around, taking it all in. "It is perfect," she said. "It is ours." "It is yours," Everett corrected. "Everything I have is yours." She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face. "I know I said I loved Henry, and I did, but this is different. This is what love is supposed to feel like coming home, like being safe and seen and valued, like anything is possible as long as we are together. I never knew it could be like this. We have the rest of our lives to figure out just how good it can be," Everett said, and then he kissed her, long and slow and full of promise. Outside, the wind whispered through the grassland. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The spring bubbled up from the ground, offering life to this harsh land. And inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds began the first night of forever. The first year of their marriage was not easy. The ranch demanded constant work. Drought threatened the cattle. A late freeze killed half their chickens. But they faced every challenge together, and somehow that made even the hard things bearable. Clara threw herself into making the ranch a home. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil with a combination of hard work and determination. She sewed curtains for every window, bright fabrics that caught the light and made the rooms feel cheerful. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, producing meals that made Dutch declare her a miracle worker. She also started helping Everett with the ranch work. At first he protested, saying it was too hard, too dangerous. But Clara was stubborn and she convinced him to teach her. She learned to ride well, to rope cattle, to mend fences. Her hands, which had been soft when she arrived in Redemption Springs, grew calloused and strong. She was never going to be as physically powerful as a man, but she was quick and clever, and she more than pulled her weight. "You are amazing," Everett told her one evening as they sat on the porch, both exhausted from a long day of branding cattle. "I am filthy and smell like smoke and cow," Clara replied, but she was smiling. "Amazing," he repeated and kissed her temple. As winter approached, Clara started feeling ill in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate or maybe just exhaustion. But when it continued for 2 weeks, she went to see Doc Harrison in town. She came back with news that made Everett whoop so loud it spooked the horses. "We are having a baby," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I am 3 months along. The baby should come in April." Everett picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "Are you all right? Should you be standing? Do you need to lie down?" "I am pregnant, not dying," Clara said, but she was touched by his concern. "Doc Harrison said I am healthy." "The baby is growing well. We just need to be sensible." "Sensible. I can do sensible." He could not, actually. He tried to prevent Clara from doing any work at all, which led to their first real fight. Clara put her foot down, explaining that she was perfectly capable of normal activity and would go mad if she had to sit around for 6 months doing nothing. They compromised. She would continue with lighter work, but would let Everett handle anything strenuous. As her belly grew, so did their excitement. They talked endlessly about the baby. What would they name it? Would it be a boy or girl? Would it have Clara's eyes or Everett's dark hair? They prepared the loft as a nursery, with Dutch building a beautiful cradle from oak wood he traded for in town. "Never thought I would see you as a father," Dutch said as they sanded the cradle smooth. "Never thought I would be one," Everett admitted. "But now I cannot imagine anything else. I want this, want to build a family with Clara, want to watch our children grow up on this land. Children plural. If we are blessed with more, yes." April arrived with unseasonable warmth and wildflowers blooming across the prairie. Clara was huge and uncomfortable, moving with the careful waddle of a woman very ready to be done with pregnancy. The labor started on a Tuesday morning. Everett rode to town like the devil himself was chasing him, fetching Doc Harrison and Alice. While they tended to Clara, he paced outside like a caged animal, driving Dutch to distraction. "Sit down before you wear a hole in the ground," Dutch ordered. "I cannot. What if something goes wrong? What if she needs me? She has the Doc and Alice. She is in good hands." But Everett could not shake the fear that gripped him. Childbirth was dangerous. Women died. Babies died. What if he lost her? What if he lost them both? The hours crawled by. Everett prayed more fervently than he had since he was a child. He made bargains with God. He would be a better man. He would never complain about anything again. He would build a new church with his bare hands. Anything. Just please let Clara and the baby be all right. As the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, he heard it. A baby's cry. Thin and angry and absolutely the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, the door opened and Alice emerged, exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, loud son, and Clara is fine." Tired but fine. Everett did not remember crossing the distance. He was just suddenly inside at Clara's bedside. She was pale and sweaty, her hair plastered to her forehead, but she was smiling, and in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Alice had made, was their son. "Look what we made," Clara said softly. Everett sat on the edge of the bed, unable to take his eyes off the tiny face. The baby had dark hair like his, but when his eyes opened briefly, they were green like Clara's. He had tiny fists curled up by his face and the smallest nose Everett had ever seen. "He is perfect," Everett whispered. "He is ours," Clara corrected. They named him James Thomas Kane, after the Garrett brother who had given Clara her first drink of water and Everett's father. Jamie, they called him. And from the moment he entered the world, he had both his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. The early days with a newborn were exhausting. Jamie seemed to believe that sleep was optional and that the most interesting things happened at 3 in the morning. Clara fed him while Everett walked the floor, bouncing the baby and singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked. They took turns being tired. They laughed at themselves, these two people who thought they knew what they were doing but clearly had no idea, but they figured it out together. They learned Jamie's cries, what each one meant. They discovered that he liked being swaddled tight and that he would fall asleep if Clara hummed a particular hymn. They watched in wonder as he grew and changed daily, becoming more himself. Dutch was a surprisingly devoted uncle figure, carving toys and making faces that earned him gummy smiles. Alice visited often, bringing food and advice and an extra pair of hands. The town embraced Jamie as it had embraced Clara, this new generation born from hope and hard work. As Jamie's first birthday approached, Clara discovered she was pregnant again. This time she knew the signs immediately. Morning sickness arrived right on schedule. "Already," Everett said, surprised but pleased. "Apparently we are efficient," Clara replied dryly. Their daughter arrived in early December, just as the first snow began to fall. Unlike Jamie's dramatic entrance, her birth was quick and relatively easy. She slipped into the world during the quiet hours before dawn, barely crying, just looking around with solemn dark eyes. They named her Rose Catherine after the wild roses that grew near the spring and Everett's sister. Rosie was quieter than her brother had been, more content to observe. Where Jamie demanded attention, Rosie seemed happy to just be held and watch the world. The house was full now. full of noise and laughter and children's things, full of love. Clara thrived as a mother, patient and firm in equal measure. Everett discovered he had endless patience for his children. Even when Jamie decided to help with the chickens by opening all the coops and Rosie spit up on his only clean shirt. The years passed in the way they do when life is full. Jamie grew into a sturdy boy with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's determination. He followed Everett everywhere, asking endless questions about the ranch. Rosie was more reserved but fiercely intelligent, learning to read before she was 5 and constantly pestering Clara for new books. When Jamie was 6 and Rosie was 4, Clara gave birth to twins. 2 boys this time, identical down to the cowlicks on the backs of their heads. They named them Henry and William, and the household descended into cheerful chaos. 4 children, Everett said one evening, watching Clara nurse the twins while Jamie and Rosie played with blocks on the floor. How did we end up with 4 children? Well, when a man and a woman love each other very much, Clara began with a wicked grin. I know how it happened. I am just marveling at it. 10 years ago, I was alone on this ranch with just Dutch for company. Now look at us. Do you regret it? Not for one single second. This is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it. The ranch had grown over the years. They had more cattle now, better horses. Everett had built an addition onto the house, giving them more bedrooms and a proper dining room. The garden Clara had started was now substantial, producing enough vegetables to sell in town. They had chickens and pigs and a barn cat who terrorized the mice. It was not always easy. There were years when the drought was bad and they had to buy feed they could barely afford. There was the year a fever went through town and they lived in terror that one of the children would catch it. There were the ordinary struggles of raising children, the arguments and tears and moments of doubt, but there was so much joy. Jamie's first successful rope throw. Rosie reading her first full book aloud, proud and stumbling. The twins learning to walk, holding hands for balance. Christmases around the tree Dutch cut and dragged in from the hills. Summers at the spring, the children splashing and shrieking. Quiet evenings on the porch after the children were in bed, Clara's head on Everett's shoulder, counting stars and talking about everything and nothing. When Jamie turned 15, he announced he wanted to join a cattle drive north. Absolutely not, Clara said immediately. Mother, I am old enough. Father went on his first drive when he was 16. That was different. How? Everett intervened before it could become a full argument. Let us talk about this, he said carefully. Jamie, why do you want to go? Because I need to know if I can do it. Need to prove I am not just a kid anymore. Need to see something beyond this ranch. Everett understood that hunger. He had felt it himself at that age. The need to test yourself to know you could handle whatever the world threw at you. If you go with my crew, he said. Men I trust. And you follow orders without question. The trail is dangerous. People die on cattle drives. I will be careful, promise me, promise both of us. Jamie looked between his parents, seeing the worry in their eyes. I promise. The drive lasted 3 months. They were the longest 3 months of Clara's life. She tried to hide her worry from the other children, but Rosie, perceptive as always, knew. Jamie will be fine, she said, helping her mother with the garden. He is strong and smart and Father is with him. I know. I just cannot stop thinking about all the things that could go wrong. You cannot protect us from everything, Mother. We have to grow up eventually. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. When Jamie returned, he was leaner, tan dark from the sun, and unmistakably more mature. He had stories about stampedes and river crossings and nights under stars that went on forever. He had done it, proven himself. And Clara had to admit he had come back changed in good ways, more confident, more capable. One by one, the children grew up. Rosie became a teacher, taking over when the old schoolteacher retired. She married a quiet rancher named Daniel who loved her fierce intelligence and gifted her books for every occasion. Jamie took over more and more of the ranch work as Everett's back began to protest the hard labor. The twins, as different as twins could be despite looking identical, both left town. Henry went east to study law. William joined the cavalry, craving adventure. The house grew quieter. Clara and Everett found themselves alone again for the first time in 20 years. It was strange at first, rattling around in rooms that had once felt too small. "It is just us again," Clara said one evening, sitting on their porch in the rocking chairs Jamie had made for their 20th anniversary. "How do you feel about that?" Everett asked, grateful, proud. "A little melancholy, but mostly just in love with you. We built something good here, Everett. 4 children who are happy and healthy and making their own ways in the world. A ranch that has stood for 25 years. A marriage that has weathered everything life threw at it." "You walked into town with nothing," Everett said softly, "and built all of this. We built it together." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years. Clara looked at him, seeing the silver in his hair now, the lines around his eyes. He was 51, no longer the young cowboy who had offered her water, but he was still hers. Still the man who had seen her at her worst and decided she was worth fighting for. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. "When I walked into town, all the time. Best day of my life until the day you married me. Then the days our children were born. I have a lot of best days and you are at the center of every single one." "I was so scared," Clara admitted. "I had nothing. I was at the absolute end of my rope. I did not know if anyone would help me or if I would just die in that street. And then you appeared. You spoke to me like I was a person, not a problem. You vouched for me. You gave me hope. You had hope already, I just recognized it." "That's enough to build on, miss," Clara quoted, smiling at the memory. "You said that to yourself as I walked away with Alice. Dutch told me years later. It was true then. It is still true now. Hope is the foundation everything else stands on." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky. In the distance, cattle lowed. Closer, the garden rustled in the evening breeze. The spring bubbled up from the ground as it had for thousands of years, offering life to those brave or desperate enough to claim it. This was home. This was family. This was the life Clara had built from nothing, and it was more than she had ever dreamed possible. As the stars began to emerge, she felt Everett squeeze her hand. She squeezed back, a silent conversation after 25 years together. "I love you, I am here, we made it." And they had. Against all odds, through hardship and heartbreak and the thousand small challenges of building a life together, they had made it. The grandchildren started arriving a few years later. Rosie's daughter was first, a serious little girl named Emma who inherited her mother's love of books. Then Jamie's sons, 3 rambunctious boys who turned the ranch into their personal adventure playground when they visited. Letters came from Henry, announcing the birth of his daughter in St. Louis. Even William sent word of a son, born at a cavalry fort in Arizona. Clara and Everett's house became the gathering place for holidays. Children and grandchildren would descend, filling the rooms with noise and energy and life. Clara would cook enormous meals while Everett told stories to the grandchildren who never seemed to tire of hearing about the old days. "Tell us about when Grandma walked into town," Emma would beg. "Yeah, tell us," the boys would chorus, and Everett would tell the story again. How he saw a woman walking out of the desert, how she swayed but did not fall, how she asked for work before she even got water, how he knew immediately that she was special. "Did you know you were going to marry her?" one of the boys asked. "I did not know it right then," Everett admitted. "But I knew she was someone I wanted to know, someone worth knowing, and I was right." The grandchildren would look at Clara with new eyes, trying to reconcile this woman who baked them cookies and mended their clothes with the desperate figure from the story. Clara would smile and ruffle their hair and tell them to go play before dinner. In the quiet moments after the family visits, when it was just the two of them again, Clara would ask Everett if he was happy. "Happier than I have any right to be," he would answer. "We have a good family, good land. We have each other. What more could a man want? To not have this aching back would be nice," Clara joked, rubbing her lower spine. Want me to rub it for you, please? These were the rhythms of their later years, simple kindnesses, comfortable routines. The deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Everett passed first at the age of 72. It was peaceful in his sleep after a day spent working the ranch he loved. Clara found him in the morning, looking like he was just resting. The grief was profound, a physical ache in her chest. But she did not break. She had survived too much to break now. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of West Texas. Their children and grandchildren, of course, but also neighbors and friends accumulated over 47 years. People whose lives Clara and Everett had touched in ways both large and small. Your grandfather was a good man, Clara told her grandchildren at the gathering after. He saw the best in people. He believed in second chances. He taught me that hope is not naive, it is brave. I want you all to remember that, to live that way. She stayed on the ranch for another 5 years, refusing all suggestions that she move to town or live with one of her children. This was her home. The home she and Everett had built together. She would leave it when she was ready and not before. On a warm July morning, nearly 60 years to the day after she had walked into Redemption Springs with nothing but hope, Clara Brennan Kane passed away in her sleep. She was 82 years old. They buried her next to Everett on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstones were simple, just names and dates and the words together always carved beneath. At the funeral, attended by an even larger crowd than Everett's had been, Jamie stood to speak. He was in his 50s now, the ranch his to run, but he looked young again as he talked about his mother. My mother taught us that circumstances do not define us, he said. She arrived here with literally nothing. No money, no possessions, barely the clothes on her back. She could have been bitter. Could have spent her life angry at the injustices she suffered. Instead, she chose hope. She chose to build. She chose love. And because she made those choices, all of us are here. 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren so far, an entire family tree that exists because one woman refused to give up. He paused, emotion thick in his throat. She told me once that the day she walked into Redemption Springs was the day her life really started, that everything before was just prologue. My father saw her standing in that dusty street and recognized her strength. He told her that hope was enough to build on. And they built something beautiful, something that will last for generations. Thank you, Mother, he finished, his voice breaking, for being brave, for being strong, for showing us what love looks like. We will miss you every day, but we will make you proud. As the service concluded and people began to disperse, a woman approached Jamie. She was young, maybe 25, with a baby on her hip and a determined look in her eyes. I am sorry to bother you, she said. I did not know your mother personally, but I heard her story. About how she walked into town with nothing and built this life. I am in a similar situation. My husband left. I have no money, but I have this baby and I have hope. I heard Redemption Springs is a good place to start over. I was hoping maybe someone could point me toward work. Jamie looked at this young woman, seeing in her the echo of his mother all those years ago, seeing the exhaustion and the fear and the stubborn refusal to surrender. What is your name? He asked gently. Sarah Mitchell. Jamie smiled, feeling like his mother was somehow orchestrating this from beyond. Well, Sarah, let me tell you something my father once said. You walked here with hope, and that is enough to build on. Come with me. We will get you water and food, and then we will find you work. This town takes care of people who are willing to work hard. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. As Jamie led her toward the ranch house, he felt the circle completing. His mother had been given a chance. Now he was giving someone else that same chance. This was the legacy Clara and Everett had built. Not just a ranch or a family, but a belief that everyone deserved a second chance. That hope was never foolish. That love could transform everything. The ranch continued for another 2 generations before eventually being sold. But the town of Redemption Springs thrived, growing from that rough frontier settlement into a proper community. And at the heart of its founding story was always the tale of Clara Brennan, the woman who walked into town with nothing but hope and built an empire of love. Tourists would come sometimes, wanting to see where the famous story took place. The spring still flowed, protected now as a historic site. The church where Clara and Everett married still stood, though it had been expanded twice. And on that hill, overlooking what had been their ranch, 2 headstones stood watch over the land they had claimed and tamed and loved. In the town museum, there was a small exhibit dedicated to the founders. It included a faded blue dress, carefully preserved, that Clara had worn the day she arrived, a pair of Everett's boots, a photograph of them in their later years sitting on their porch, hands clasped, smiling at the camera, and a placard that told their story. Clara Brennan walked into Redemption Springs on July 15, 1878, carrying nothing but hope. Thomas Everett Kane recognized that hope as the foundation for something beautiful. Together, they built a ranch, raised a family, and demonstrated that love and determination can overcome any obstacle. Their marriage lasted 47 years until Everett's death in 1925. Clara passed away in 1930, surrounded by the large family she and Everett had created. They are remembered as founders not just of a successful ranch, but of the spirit of resilience and community that defines Redemption Springs to this day. School children would come through on field trips, reading the placard and looking at the artifacts. Teachers would tell them the story, emphasizing the themes of perseverance and hope. And every year on July 15, the town held Founders' Day, celebrating not just Clara and Everett but everyone who had come to this harsh land and chosen to stay, chosen to build, chosen to hope. Because that was what Clara had taught them in the end. That hope was not passive, it was active. It was a choice you made every day when you got up and kept going despite the odds. It was seeing possibility where others saw only problems. It was believing that tomorrow could be better than today if you were willing to work for it. She had walked into town with nothing but hope, and a cowboy had told her that was enough to build on. He had been right. It was more than enough. It was everything. And the story of their love, born from desperation and despair but blossoming into something beautiful and lasting, lived on long after they were gone. It lived in their descendants, in the town they had helped build, in the land they had tamed. But most of all, it lived in the idea that had brought them together in the first place, the simple, profound truth that hope, when met with love, can build miracles. The end.